I was asked to talk about 9/11. It's a little tough. I got to get through this because I lost a ton of friends that day, as you'll know here in a minute. And to talk about 911 from my foxhole is totally irrelevant for you. You don't care, I hope, where I was or what I did or what I've ever done. That's not important to you, I hope. What is important to you is why you're here. You celebrate America, and you want to find out a reason to carry on the tradition that Renee has set for us. And so there's just one little piece in my story that I want to focus on. When I get there, unfortunately for you, I got to tell the whole story. But when I get there, that might be the core of the message for you that could be something that down the road you might remember, and thus remember the beauty of our country and the sacrifice of all of its heroes, including everyday citizens who were just going to work that day. So if you would bear with me for 15 or 20 minutes while I tell you my story. Again, my story is not important. I'm very much alive today. I was not killed in 9/11. I wasn't injured. I wasn't burned. I wasn't taken prisoner. So I feel uncomfortable suggesting that you should listen to my story. But I'll ask you to do it anyway, and it'll give me that one moment when I'll talk to you about Tim. Okay. So I was a 3-star general back in that day, 2001, believe it or not. And the Army saw fit, and so did the president, because to be a 3-star, the president gets all involved in whatever. To be a corps commander, that's a pretty big deal in the Army. There are 4 corps in the Army, 18th Airborne Corps and 5th Corps and 1st Corps, I Corps. And then there's 3rd Corps. 3 Corps is your big armored corps. It's where all the tanks are, not all of them, but it's a ton of tanks. And it's headquartered out at Fort Hood, Texas, with soldiers in Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Kansas, principally. That's where all the folks are. And in peacetime, about 70,000 soldiers in 3 Corps. And so that's where my wife, Katie, and I were, and had only been there a short while. And got to know our congressional delegation there in Texas pretty quick, because that's where all the money came from for all my installations, but especially Fort Hood, where my headquarters was. So I got to know them, and I particularly got to know our local representative, I say local, our representative and our senators. So on the 10th of September, 2001, I'm sitting there at Fort Hood. And by the way, I got rid of my book because if I have to read to you about 911, you should hang me immediately. So you could hang me anyway, but I'm not going to read to you about 911. At any rate, I'm sitting at my headquarters at Fort Hood, and Gary came in, my aide-de-camp, who himself is a 4-star general now, and he said, "Sir, it's time to go." I said, "Yeah, you're right, let's go." And we were headed to Washington to brief our congressional delegation on a range of things that I needed for my corps and I needed for my installation at Fort Hood, Texas specifically. And on this trip, I was going to brief a lady, senator. She was a senator named Kay Bailey Hutchison. For all of you old timers, you've heard of this lady. She was a very powerful senator, a terrific lady, and a great patriot. So we flew to Washington on military aircraft and landed and went to our quarters at Fort Myer. Fort Myer is the Army quarters that overlooks the Pentagon and tends to a lot of things, but it's where the 3rd Infantry, the Old Guard, the Presidential Guard is housed. Where all the folks that tend to the unknown soldier, they live at Fort Myer, et cetera, et cetera. Along with Arlington Cemetery, it falls under the purview of Fort Myer. But also, if dumb generals come walking in, they have quarters that they put you in so you can go to the Pentagon the next day and do whatever you want to do in the Pentagon. So we spent the night at Fort Myer, and then at 7 o'clock on the 11th of September, we went down to the Pentagon. And I wasn't assigned to the Pentagon at the time. So we went to a place called this is an acronym, FORSCOM Liaison Office. Most of you have never heard of that acronym and don't care, but it's an acronym for Forces Command, which also doesn't make much sense, but it's the headquarters that owns all the Army in the United States physically, not in Europe or in Asia or whatever, but if you're assigned to the Army in America on the continental United States, you belong to FORSCOM. And their headquarters was at the time at a place called Fort McPherson, Georgia. They had a liaison office in the Pentagon so that wayward subordinate generals like me could go in there, sit down, read some intelligence stuff to see if the world was still there, read the news and articles, talk to whomever, and finish preparing for whatever you were going to go do, whether it's a briefing to the Joint Chiefs or even going over to Capitol Hill. So with Gary there and my enlisted aide, I went to the liaison office, which was located on the C ring of the western face of the Pentagon. And all that area housed what we called the Army in those days, DESPER, Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel, and in this case, his people. They're all the folks that run the people in the Army. So if you get assigned somewhere, there's some dude sitting there that is responsible for assigning you, okay? And a good friend of mine, Tim Maud, was the G1, the DESPER, and so I went by to see Tim and then went back to the liaison office and blah, blah, blah. I ran around and read some intel stuff and got ready. And then Gary said, "Sir, we got to go to Capitol Hill because we've got a meeting." I said, I know, let's go. So Gary had a car arranged, and at about 8 o'clock that morning, I jumped in the car. All is well. Bluebird Day, just like today in Chattanooga. It's a beautiful day. Jumped in the car, September, it's just perfect. And we went across 14th Street Bridge up to Capitol Hill. And sure enough, I deposited myself in yet again another liaison office. I don't have an office. I didn't have one in the Capitol for sure. But there was an Army Legislative Liaison Office on Capitol Hill, where anybody who wanted to go talk to a congressman or woman or a senator, you had to go to the Office of Congressional Liaison first. And you could sit down there and read some more intel. You could watch, in those days, CNN. Personally, I don't watch CNN anymore. That's another issue. But you could watch CNN. I'm sorry. I'm not going to become political today. I kind of don't promise. I do promise. I would watch that and see what the latest news was. It was all standard stuff. It was nothing, okay? And I sat there for about an hour, and right around 9 o'clock, Gary, God bless him, said, "Sir, it's time to go to Senator Hutchison's office," which the appointment with her was at 9:15, and this was 9 o'clock. And right then, CNN broke to a newsflash that an aircraft had run into one of the towers in New York, and they didn't know exactly what was going on. And I sat there and thought, this is World War II. You may recall you probably don't recall in World War II, and I don't either. But historically, we had a bomber run into the Empire State Building in World War II. A terrible crash, an accident. A big, I think it was a B-17 bomber. It was terrible. So I sat there and thought, some idiot in a private plane, a Cessna or something, has run into one of the Trade Center towers. And, God bless them. I'm sure they're dead, but hopefully this is no big deal. And then I saw the camera come on. They got their camera up there in New York, come on. And you could tell instantly that it was a very large aircraft that had hit that building, because the slice that the wingspans cut through the building went from side to side of the building. And that was a huge building, very wide. And I just sat there and looked at that thing, and it didn't dawn on me what was going on, other than how in God's name could an airplane of that size, whomever owned it, run into a giant building on a Bluebird Day? It's just not possible. And we began to talk about it and speculate and whatever. And then there was this enormous confusion in CNN. I mean, they were yelling at each other and screaming. He's sitting there watching this thing. What is going on? Besides, this building was burning. And then they switched the camera to the other building. And sure enough, a second aircraft. And of course, that did it for all of us. I said, Gary, there's been a damn terrorist attack. And somehow they've crashed into the World Trade Tower, both towers. And quite frankly, I said to him straight up, we got to get the hell out of here. Call Senator Hutchison and tell her we're not coming. We're going back to the Pentagon so I can get back to the liaison office, talk to my command, and get them ready for war. Because we're going to war. You can smell it right now. And he said, sir, I got to run around. I said, I'll meet you out front. So I ran out of the Capitol and stood there. And about, 5 minutes later, Gary showed up and said, sir, the car's on the way. And I'm looking that way, across the Potomac, about 4 miles away, at the Pentagon. That's where I wanted to go, when the Pentagon exploded in front of my very eyes. Now, it's 4 miles away, and it was just surreal. And I've been in war before. This was a war zone. I'm just looking at the Pentagon blow up in front of my eyes. I said, dear God, Gary, it's not that we're under attack in New York. The United States is under attack. And I said, we're not going to the Pentagon. It's not going to do me any good to go there. It's on fire. The whole thing is ablaze. I got to get to Fort Hood. He said, yes, sir, I understand. I said, well, how in God's name are we going to get to Fort Hood? I didn't have an airplane. I didn't have anything. So, and looking at this thing, I then said to Gary, I said, look, we're going to Fort McNair. Now, McNair is on this side of the Potomac, and it's about 2 miles away from Capitol Hill, maybe 2 miles. And it's where the National War College is located. I had attended it, and I knew McNair like the back of my hand. Yeah, I knew McNair. And so I said, Gary, where's the car? And he said, sir, you can forget the car. Look out there on the streets. And as you can imagine, everybody was running out of their offices all over Washington into their cars. It was instant gridlock. Nobody could move anywhere. You could see it just happening. It was like checkers falling down on top of themselves. I said, forget it. Let's go. And we took off running in my very first, green uniform, looking very good. And we just took off on a dead run. I said, follow me. Do as I do. That's a good infantry tactic. Follow me and do as I do. And I ran to Fort McNair as fast as I could. Got to the front gate, gave my credentials, and said, take me to your headquarters. Got to the headquarters, and I said, by the way, I'm in charge right now because I'm the senior officer, and here's what we're going to do. One, get me a phone. I want to call my boss at FORSCOM, which I did. Is General Jay Hendricks, a great guy. I don't know if any of you know Jay or not. 4-star general at the time, and I said, sir, this is BB. I'm in Fort McNair. The whole place is burning down. I need to get to Fort Hood. Sir, is there anything you can do to help me? And he said, maybe. The government gives the FORSCOM commander an airplane all the time. He's always got it available. He said, it's at Andrews Air Force Base right now. He said, it's up there for some reason. I don't even know what they're doing up there, but that's where they are. Let me call and see if I can get you my airplane. He said, military traffic is still operating. All civilian air traffic shut down. I said, okay. 5 minutes later, Jay called me back and said, my aircraft's going to be ready for you in 30 minutes. Get to Andrews Air Force Base. Yes, sir. And I turned to Gary and I said, can't be done, can it, Gary? He said, no, sir, it can't be done. It's gridlock. This is a great point. I turned to the colonel that was there and I said, find me a great sergeant right now. And I said, the only criteria is he or she have got to be from right around here somewhere. Just find me one who's from here, born and raised. Sir, I don't know what to, just find one. 10 minutes later, this colonel came back with a great staff sergeant who was from that area. And I looked him in the eye and I said, Sergeant, do you know anything about this area? He said, sir, I know everything about this area. I was born and raised here. I said, good. Get me and my aide-de-camp to Andrews Air Force Base right now. He said, sir, follow me to my car. We jumped in his private car, and I can only then describe the ride that we took as Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. God bless this young man. We went through yards, back alleys, baseball fields, and everything else you can imagine except roads And 1 hour later, we arrived at Andrews Air Force Base. Now, understand, normally from that location, I've done it 100 times, it's a 45-minute drive. And this great sergeant made it in an hour, not using America's roads. And with my hands totally white and numb, we jumped out of the car. I thanked him forever. Never saw him again. I wish I could find him. What a great, typical non-commissioned officer in America's military. Give them a mission and get the hell out of their way right now. And if you want to get in their way, it ain't going to work. Whatever you want done, just get out of their way. At any rate, sure enough, Hendricks' plane was there. We jumped on a plane, took off right then, and flew right over the Pentagon. And that's when it really dawned on me, because I could look straight down on the Pentagon. And the west wall was gone. And the D ring, the next ring, was gone. And the C ring, and I could see the liaison office where I had been, was there. But it was in flames from the jet fuel that had spewed into it. And I knew that everyone was dead in the E ring or the D ring. And I knew that was likely my close friend, Tim. And then I was fearful for those who were in the C ring, the secretaries, and they were just regular people that went to work that day. Flew onto the hood and got in there and went to my office, and I'd already called the head and said, I need an intel briefing. I need the installations secured in all of our states that I had military posts I was responsible for. And so, you know, we had machine guns out and the whole deal, figuring that there would be an attack. We didn't have any idea. But what they told me was that, among other things, that at the Pentagon, the D ring had been destroyed, and the C ring and the E ring, and that most of the people that were killed there, 126, not on the aircraft but in the Pentagon, were Army DESPER people. I said, okay, have they found Tim Maud? No, sir, he's missing. Okay. I'll explain that momentarily. When I left the Pentagon that morning, I'd left my briefcase in my liaison office because it's full of classified material. And I, of course, wasn't worried about the briefcase, but I just want you to know that for a moment. I left it there because I didn't want to take it over on Capitol Hill and, you know, have a security issue. Anyway, as the days went on, and I learned about the Flight 96 from United Airlines that brave patriots took down over Pennsylvania. I learned more details about what happened in the Pentagon and what happened in New York. As I learned more and more about that, I sat there and thought, what if for me, my meeting with K. Bailey Hutchison had been an hour later and I was still in the liaison office? And I thought about Flight 96, who our intelligence determined later on, didn't take them long, was going to use the mall in Washington as a lineup for hitting the Capitol building. And I said to myself, why did God let me walk away from this? I could have, maybe should have been killed in the Pentagon. I could have, maybe should have been killed in the Capitol building. But I have a scratch on me. But all my friends did. And it affected me. When I talked to Terry, Tim's wife, about a week later, she's a good friend, Katie and I talked to her. She was fairly upbeat, and she said, just between us, they can't locate any of Tim's remains or a lot of the folks' remains. They're incinerated. But she said, I thank the Lord. They found his wedding ring, his wedding band, and I've got it. I'm sorry, June, I know you're thinking about your husband and what happened and fire. But that's the last time I ever saw Tim and dozens of other people that I'd grown up with in the Army. I just happened to be assigned to Fort Hood, and they just happened to be assigned to the Army in the Pentagon. And then, you know, we had this great speech by President Bush unrehearsed, on that pile of rubble in New York, where he let the terrorists know that they would hear from all of us soon. And they did. And some years later, Osama bin Laden was killed by SEAL Team 6 at his compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. And many other terrorists were killed, and they are still being killed today. We'll get to the end of America's experiment if indeed brave souls like we have in our military and brave Americans like you all stick by our Constitution, stick by our way of life, which is based on our value system, which comes from our Judeo-Christian, ancient Judeo-Christian values as espoused for us, mostly in the Old Testament. And no matter what religion or what creed you are loyal to, those things in Judeo-Christian history, ancient history, are good concepts to follow. They talk about things like, thou shalt not murder, which had happened to almost 3,000 innocent Americans that day. Thou shalt not kill. All the rules for justice, Tori, come from that old book and have been ensconced into civil codes for great leaders, councilmen, women, judges, to adjudicate. But it's God's will that comes to us through those ancient documents that we put out in civil code. And it's fine, if someone is not a Christian or is not a Jew or a Muslim or whatever, they certainly don't have to be. But in our nation, the United States of America, and in using our Constitution, and in employing its principles, and its 10 amendments, you got to go back to our Judeo-Christian culture and our values, all those religions, because it's there where we'll find our future. It is there where we will stand and deliver against future terrorists who seek to end our way of life. It's in those where we will find who we should elect to lead us. It's there where our future will be told or it will end. You being here today tell me that my 39 years of service was not only not in vain, it was important to America. And Private Jones' service is just as important. And your service is also just as important. As you leave here today, I would pray to God that you will take with you the memory of those who died during 9/11, instantly in most cases, probably slowly and tragically in some others, but at the hands of people who do not subscribe to your value set. We must fight this with our emotions. We must fight this with our being. We must fight this at the ballot box, and we must fight it on the battlefield when necessary. Then and only then can we look back on our kids and forward to our grandkids and say, I did what was right today. And I want you to do what's right tomorrow. Thank you.